At this point, we're on part 2. So the last video covered creating, let's get rid of this, creating our grid, right? So now we have the grid, and I'm not really going to talk about how to create the grid after this point. So this is old code, so I'm just going to put some comment lines so we can move on past it. So what's the next part, right? So we got our grid. Wow, nice, I can check that off. Now we have to, the first thing to do in this whole, when you click a square, use adjacent square, there's a 50% chance of the effect rippling to it. Bind a click event to each square in the grid. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So how do you bind a click event in general, I guess, is the first thing to go over. So a lot of what I'm going to be going through is not necessarily a tutorial in JavaScript, but a tutorial in front-end JavaScript. And the API is a part of the browser and the DOM, right? The DOM being the it means document object model, and it's basically just how you how we think about what's on the screen here as a series of relationships between parent and child. So we have a class, we have a div element, which is a child of the document as class container, and then it has row children, and then each row has 10 square children, etc., etc. So a lot of what we're talking about is the DOM, document.createElement, talking about classes, appending children, that sort of thing. Another thing, a part of the DOM, is stuff like click events, right? You're not going to have click events on a Node API because that backend code has nothing to do with mouse clicks and stuff like that, right? So let's do like a really basic click event. I wish they had a console built into this thing because this is ugly. Okay, that looks a little better. Actually, I gotta charge my computer. 1 second. So let's do a very basic click event just to get show off the API and whatnot. Make that kind of small. Okay. So we have our container from before, right? So let's just console.log it. Let's log it to the console here. Yep, we can see it. Nice. Thanks for refreshing it so many times, CodePen. That's really cool. So we're going to container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the container to bind a click event to. So you can use jQuery and stuff, and then you would do stuff like container.click and stuff like that. But we're not using jQuery. We're going to stick to plain old JavaScript for various reasons that I won't get into. It's better to learn the underlying JavaScript that makes up libraries like that. So what we're going to do is a click event is fired off by the browser, right? And when that event is fired off, the browser, you can tie function calls to be fired off by the browser at the time of that event's occurrence, I guess. So the way of doing that is adding event listeners. Those are the functions that are fired off by the browser at the time of clicking, right? So if I click on this, nothing special happens, right? Because we haven't tied any events to it or tied any listeners to that event. So you call the function add event listener, and actually we don't want document, we want container.add event listener. And then we have to declare what type of event. It's a click event. This is ridiculous, these errors. Can we just like get logs or something? No errors, you're awful. So, we've declared our event type. You're still reporting errors? Don't do that. No one wants those. Again, container.add event listener click. So we're adding an event listener for the click event, and we're passing it here a function. So, comma, function is the second argument is a function, right? And I'm just going to do a console.log of hi, you clicked me. So, the idea here is that when we click on the container, this function will be called off, and it will log hi, you clicked me. And you can see it's being logged every time I click. Great. So that's the basic API of adding a click event, or adding an event listener for the click. However you want to think about it. We'll just call it a click event now. So now the whole idea here is that we're going to be binding a click event to the squares, not the container, right? So sadly, we don't have square defined. Or do we? Tell me I'm wrong. Go pen. Uncaught reference error, square is not defined. So I'm right. Square is not defined, right? Square is only defined in our functions up here, which we defined earlier. Where do we have access to square? So what we're actually going to need to do is every time we create a square, we need to bind this listener function, right? So let's do the same thing. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with the container. Square.add event. Oh my god, the tagging is off. That's bothering me so bad. Add event listener. Same thing. Click. Pass it a function. This time we're gonna console.log the square itself. Let's do no. Let's pass off row and I. So we can tell, actually let's just console.log I. So this will give us which square in the row it is, right? So that should give us the column theoretically. 10, that's wrong. That makes sense. So I'm not going to get into why it's returning 10 every time. Basically, it's returning 10 every time because this function is being called after the for loop is already executed, right? So add squares row is already executed because the squares are already on the screen, right? But our click is coming way after that. And so I is already equal to 10. It's already been iterated up to our endpoint, 10. So what we can do is make this a closure. Okay, you're bastard code pen. Okay, that's just gonna make that way too confusing. All right, we're not gonna print out I. We're gonna print out just hi, I guess. Okay, great. Yep, we got our click handler. It's actually very hard to tell if it's. Let's do square again. It's very hard to tell which one we're clicking on because I could have just been binding that to the container and then there's no difference, right? It's going to be the last one in every row, again, for the same reason. We would actually need a closure, and the closure would basically encapsulate our instance of the square, or I, like before. But because we're not encapsulating it, it's always getting the last one. So that's pretty lame. I'm surprised. You know what? That's actually interesting. Let's see. No, never mind. Let's not get into that. So anyway, what we want to do is do something cool, like actually, if we want to get the square, we can actually be smart. So it's an event listener, right? So this function is fired off when an event happens. And this function can actually take an argument of the event that's being fired off, right? So now we get these, you can actually see like where I'm clicking, cool, or right. So you can, event has a, it's pretty cool how you're just like not showing me the information. But anyways, event has a property of target, and target is what you clicked on. So now we'll actually get the proper square. See, now we're not getting the last one because the event actually, this mouse event just keeps track of like all the stuff when that event goes off. So one of the things that's a part of it obviously is the element you're clicking on. So now we get track of that. So let's do that instead of the stupid enclosure or closure. So now we have to redefine square as event.target, right? And what we want to do is change the color of it. That would be a cool thing to do. So square.style.background is equal to blue. I don't know why it just, oh, because it refreshed. So yeah, it's pretty cool. You can see now that when you click, the color changes to blue. And the reason that's happening is we have our event target, which is the square. I can't hover over those anymore because that's from a previous event, whatever. We have our square, which is what we clicked on, right? And then what we're saying is what we clicked on, I want to reference the style, and then I want to change the background, a part of its style, to blue. And you can inspect this, and what you'll see is that in the HTML here, you see style is equal to background-color blue, right there. Pretty cool. So we bound our click event. So what's the next part? Having it spread, this effect spread to an adjacent square. I'm going to kind of just get the basics of that code done first, and then I will start the next video after I have that down.